Hey guys, it's Sue. Welcome back. If you happen to hear noises in the background, it could either be thunder or rain. I don't know if you could hear that through the speaker, but there's a storm coming. But anyway, we're going to progress on this discussion video of Can You Forgive Her by Anthony Trollope. During the month of April, I participated in a read-along hosted by Steve Donahue, in which every week of that month we read 20 chapters of this particular book, and Steve did a discussion video about what was happening within the book within those 20 chapters. And several readers posted their own discussion videos. Sadly, I did not do that. I kind of regret not having posted my thoughts on it as the story progressed, but I'm going to go ahead and just kind of do a discussion video. There will be spoilers, so I'll be talking about the plot through to the end of the book. But it's a lot just to kind of share my impressions of the characters and what I felt and how my mind kind of changed about these characters as the story went along. Now, this is my first Anthony Trollope book, and it's the first book in the Palliser series, a series that apparently deals a lot with money and politics, although I didn't find it that heavy-handed within this particular volume, although I do hear, I think, politics plays more of a role as the story goes along. But this basically features three women, each one kind of torn between two men in their lives and the path that their lives will take. The main one is focused on Alice Vavasor. She is the her in the Can You Forgive Her title that we were focused on. She's a woman who lost her mother shortly after she was born, within a 12-month period, and I wouldn't say has necessarily been raised by her father, John Vavasor. He hasn't been very present in her life. He's either spent most of the time at a club or working as a barrister. He goes into work, and his main job is just to sign his name to papers, which he seems to find too taxing. Alice's mother was from a fairly well-off family, and when she passed, they wanted to make sure that money didn't pass directly to John Vavasor, because they didn't approve of the marriage anyway. Their daughter had just gone ahead and married him against their wishes. She was very headstrong, and so instead the family's made sure that the mother's inheritance has gone directly to the child, Alice, and so she has her own independent wealth. She's also kind of equally headstrong, just like her mother. We find her at the beginning of this book engaged to a man named John Gray, who seems to be a worthy fit for her. Again, kind of arranged, but she's sort of rebelling against that. She sees a future with him perhaps being rather dull, that she would be nothing more than relegated to maybe a higher servant within his household. She's much more ambitious. She's drawn to politics, but being a woman, of course, can't serve in any way in politics, but she becomes drawn to her cousin, George Vavasor. He's wildly ambitious, also kind of not seen as very trustworthy, but she sort of sees beyond that, perhaps at the pushing of her friend Kate, which is George's sister, and thus also Alice's cousin. Kate's a big, strong supporter of her brother George and would love to see nothing more than a union between her brother and Alice. So she ends up breaking off her engagement with John Gray and becoming engaged to George. But she pushes the wedding date at least a year. She doesn't want to be actually married for at least a year. Now, that's one character in here. Like I said, this is kind of mirrored, this indecision is mirrored within two other women within the book. The other one is Lady Glencora, who's a very good friend of Alice. She is married at the moment. She is married to Plantagenet Palliser. He's a member of Parliament. He is very big on politics. His whole life has been drawn to that. His ambition is to be the Chancellor of the Exchequer. But, of course, Lady Glencora, coming also from a fairly rich family, she has money of her own as well, feels sort of trapped in this, what she feels is sort of a loveless marriage. They don't really know each other very well. And Plantagenet Palliser being drawn and it's focused so much on work, and Lady Glencora feels that also with her inability to provide a child, a heir to the Duke of Omnium. That's who Plantagenet Palliser is. He's the Duke of Omnium. She's unable to provide an heir, and it feels like it's caused a rift between them. And she ends up being drawn to a penniless, handsome man named Burgo Fitzgerald, and she confesses this feelings to her friend Alice, which Alice tries to dissuade her. But perhaps the marriage that she sees Lady Glencora in, her friend, also kind of pushes her away from John Gray. She sees her trapped in what she thinks is a dull, kind of loveless marriage, and she doesn't want that same union with John Gray. So she's drawn to George Vavasor. Not that there's any really feelings of love there as well. So I was kind of annoyed with Alice. It's like, just because she didn't want the marriage with John Grey didn't mean she had to throw in her lot with George Vavasor. Perhaps she could have found a purpose in her life somewhere else, but it was just a poor decision. Like, she seems to make a lot of these poor decisions. So on to Lady Glencora. Like I said, she is drawn to Burgo Fitzgerald, penniless man, who I think really is just after her fortune as well. There's really no love between him, I don't think, and Lady Glencora, although he confesses there is. And the thing is, Lady Glencora, she also makes these poor decisions. She's very honest about them, at least with her friend, but to be drawn to this man who, she's got to know he's just after her money. Why would she do that? If she's not happy in her marriage, doesn't mean she has to latch on to somebody else. She is independently wealthy, she could survive on her own. So, kind of annoyed me with that character. And then the third woman we have is Mrs. Greenow. She's actually the aunt of Alice. Alice's father, John Vavasor, and Mrs. Greenow were brother and sister. And she's sort of the comedy aspect in a way. Not overly comedic, but it's the comic aspect of the novel. Her whole situation. She is a widow, and she's very theatrical about the loss of her beloved husband, which I don't know how much she truly loved him. I think she just gets into the character of being the widow, and very over the top about it. He passed away like some year ago, and she's being pursued by two men. We have a Captain Belfield, kind of a penniless soldier. So again, you have the one person who doesn't have the money, who sort of wants the money, and then you have the other well-off person in the relationship, and this is a Mr. Cheesacre. He's a very wealthy farmer who likes to let it be known how wealthy he is. He's constantly talking about everything he owns. It gets kind of annoying, and Mrs. Greenow sometimes lets him know that. He does everything he can to try and build a relationship between himself and Mrs. Greenow, but everything backfires on him. Everything goes wrong. He tries to arrange a gathering, luncheon or whatever, and tries to make it so he's sitting right next to her, but somehow things always go wrong for him, and Captain Belfield ends up in the spot where he wants to be in. So it's just, that was like kind of a humorous aspect. I like that lighter side of it. But as the story progresses, you see the bad mistakes that Alice has made by latching on with George Vavasor. See, George and Kate, both of them, are the children of the eldest Vavasor. So John and Mrs. Greenow's eldest brother. He would have inherited the main inheritance from the Squire Vavasor, who is an older gentleman here. He's in very poor health. He's the grandfather of Kate and George. And George would like nothing better than the Squire to pass away so he can inherit the fortune right away. See, he needs the money to help him obtain a seat in Parliament. Think like campaign money or something. He ends up getting just enough to kind of take a temporary seat when someone vacates at mid-season, but when that term ends, he needs more money to pursue a full term in Parliament. And he tries to kind of push Alice forward with the marriage, because then he could get her money in the wedding. But she says no, it's going to wait this year. But she makes a promise to let him have access to her money before, and John Grey finds out about this. Now, John Grey, in the beginning, you didn't really know a whole lot about him, just that Alice didn't have any strong feelings for him. She thought he was kind of dull, but you start to see this character build, and you see the feelings he truly does have for Alice, and how sad that he didn't let those feelings be known to her beforehand. Maybe she would have felt more strongly for him, but he finds out that George Vavasor is trying to get a hold of her money. And like I said, he still cares deeply enough for her that he works with Alice's father, John Vavasor, and says, this is what's happening. And her father doesn't like George all that much either, doesn't trust him. So John says when George comes, when Alice asks for her money, for him to get money out of the bank for her to give to George, let me know, I will give you my money to give. So he gives up his own wealth to just to save hers, and works behind the scenes. And I really like that aspect of the character, that he still, he really did care for her, and irregardless of her feelings for him, he would still look out for her best interest. And I like the fact that her father finally kind of steps up and goes along with this to kind of protect her as well. So his character, I started to feel a little bit better for, but again, he seemed a bit lazy, and he could have been a much better father figure. And as the story progresses, George finds out. There's one scene where he's trying to push the marriage. Like I said, he's trying to push the marriage forward, but Alice even just kind of recoils from his touch. She doesn't truly love him. And again, why did she push forward the marriage? But she refuses to get married quickly. His anger just bursts out, and then she sees the true side of him. He can be quite vicious. He's quite cruel, and starts throwing things around the room, storms out, and then he goes to meet with John Grey, and they have it out. He's like, "What are you doing? What are you involving yourself in with my fiance?" And I think something's going on underhanded, and his character just gets worse and worse and worse. He's just absolutely despicable. By the end of the story, there's more to it too. He, like I said, he still wants his grandfather to die, who does eventually die. But before he does, he changes his will to prevent George from getting an inheritance, and passes it on to his other two children, John Vavasor and Mrs. Greenough, at least to be held in trust until like Kate maybe should happen to have children. Then it would pass to her children. But it circumnavigates. It will never reach George. So all of this, Alice's feelings for him, this other guy, involving himself in their marriage and getting in the way, and then things not going well with his bid for Parliament, just kind of blows up, and he tries to get his sister to go to the courts and say the squire was not in his right mind when he changed the will, and that they should revert back to the original will. She refuses. He gets violent, shoves her, ends up breaking her arm. He doesn't realize it, but he just doesn't care. It's all about him. Nobody else matters in his life. He wants the money, he wants the Parliament. And that's something I didn't understand about this particular character. What was his motivation so much to become a member of Parliament? Didn't seem like he had any political aspirations, any stands on any particular issues. We were never given that information in any way. It was more like what it could do for him, perhaps down the road. Maybe companies would, want his input or something, or he would get some kind of position from that, and then get some wealth back in return. But not that he would do any kind of benefit to society or anything with his opinions on important issues. That was never anything important in there. So his character, just at first I was just thinking, he's just, okay, he wants to get in office, whatever. He's just a little uncontrolled youth or whatever, cousin of Alice and stuff. But his character just went downhill as it went on, and eventually, after an attempt on John Grey's life, he ends up leaving the story, and we just don't really know. He ends up going to America, and we don't know what happened to him. It's sort of like the first of the many goodbyes of various characters within the book. On to Lady Glencora's character, again, she's, like I said, torn between her marriage and this other Burgo Fitzgerald, handsome, exciting, different path in her life. But she, as much as she's drawn to him, she also never quite makes that furthest step. She always stops, one point before. And I think Plantagenet Palliser always just assumed that nothing would come between their marriage. He would trust his wife. But I think he truly starts to see, that how she feels. And at one point, they have the discussion they should have had long ago. She says, I don't think you ever, I don't think you truly love me, or that I truly love you, that we really know each other. And he decides to finally set things right. And this is where I started to like his character as well. At first, I didn't think much about him. I thought he was, not really present in his marriage, a little oblivious to what was going on, or the possibility of what could happen with the marriage. And finally, his eyes waken up. He finally wakes up and decides to do something about it. And he kind of puts his political career on hold. Right on the eve of when he is offered the Chancellor of the Exchequer, his dream position, and he sets that aside. And that just raised him up a level, unbelievable. He decides to go away with his wife and trying to, rebuild the relationship. He invites Alice along. They had a disagreement earlier on, but he knows her relationship with his wife is very close bond, and it might be a comfort to have her nearby. And he works on rebuilding this relationship. And I really like this character for that, like I said. And during the course of their trip away, she becomes pregnant and is able to finally provide a child in the marriage. While they're away with Alice, John Grey kind of, says that he'll pop in, and she doesn't know how to feel about this. And I like that he kind of keeps himself near, but not pushy. We come to learn from his character that he's forgiven her a long time ago. He loved her so much that he was willing to let her go if that's what she wanted. Even if she married another man, he would forgive her. But with the case of George Vavasor, he knew that George would not make her happy. And for that case, he would not be happy. But like I said, he still looked out for her and stayed in the background. And eventually, as he meets up with her on the trip, a relationship kind of builds. But the authors kind of talks to the reader here and there, about Alice and saying how, can you forgive her? And it's Alice who has the biggest trouble forgiving herself for being what she describes to herself as being the jilt. And you watch her struggle with that, and it was just frustrating. Like, come on, John has forgiven you, John Grey has forgiven you. And that's the one you hurt the most. And he's been pretty much professing that he loves her, everything he's done for her. And by still refusing, you're just hurting him more. And she really does start to feel for him. So there is that love there, that I think her ambition or her, want to be, to do something purposeful in her life kept getting in the way of. I didn't like the way it describes it later on. It's like, now that there's a man in her life, that she doesn't have to worry about this, or these decisions or something like that. Like, okay, everything's better. You're married now. But I did like that when he's finally able to convince her that, to forgive herself and end up becoming married to him. So lots of things start to wrap up. And the whole situation with Miss Greenough, she ends up, I didn't think she would end up marrying either one of them or joining up with either one of them. Mr. Cheesacre just never had a chance. And she does end up tying her, her future with Captain Belfield. But it seems like she's going to be more of a mother figure to him, kind of just keeping him on the straight and narrow from some of the things he was doing. And it was just a lot of real interesting situations with the characters. I like to see the progression of change with several of them. Seeing John Grey's character come out, seeing Plantagenet Palliser's character change, and putting his marriage first above his future. He was really interesting. There's a situation here where once she's become pregnant and their bond has become stronger and their marriage has become stronger, and they see a future for each other, they happen to run into Burgo Fitzgerald, the former love of her life, and he's really really down. He's out like betting. He throws in all his money. He ends up penniless, and everyone's kind of sort of worried, what's he going to do now? He might take his own life. He's so desperate and everything. And she asks her husband to do something for him, to help him out. And he steps forward and does. And that just shows what kind of character he had. I really like that about that character. My overall impressions is this book. I want to read you the very first chapter. And I thought, holy crap, this is going to be a tough read. I read a lot of classics, probably more so than I ever have in the past few years. I just seem to be more drawn to them, but the writing of this in the beginning seemed a bit daunting, and I just wanted to just read this first chapter to you, and you know what my first impressions were with this. Okay, it begins chapter 1, Mr. Vavasor and his daughter. Whether or no she who you are to forgive, if you can, did or did not belong to the upper 10,000 of this our English world, I am not prepared to say with any strength of affirmation. By blood she was connected with big people, distantly connected with some very big people indeed, people who belonged to the upper 1,000, if there be any such division, but of these very big relations she had known and seen little, and they cared as little for her. Her grandfather, Squire Vavasor of Vavasor Hall in Westmoreland, was a country gentleman, possessing some 1,000 a year at the outside, and he therefore never came up to London and had no ambition to have himself numbered as one in any exclusive set. A hot-headed, ignorant, honest gentleman, He lived ever at Vavasor Hall, declaring to any who would listen to him that the country was going to the mischief, and congratulating himself that at any rate, in this country, parliamentary reform had been powerless to alter the old political arrangements. Alice Vavasor, whose offense against the world I am to tell you, and if possible to excuse, was the daughter of his younger son, and as her father, John Vavasor, had done nothing to raise the family name to eminence, Alice could not lay claim to any high position from her birth as a Vavasor. John Vavasor had come up to London early in life as a barrister and had failed. He had failed at least in attaining either much wealth or much repute, though he had succeeded in earning, or perhaps I might better say in obtaining, a livelihood. He had married a lady somewhat older than himself who was in possession of 400 a year, and who was related to these big people to whom I have alluded. Who these were and the special nature of the relationship I shall be called upon to explain hereafter, but at present it will suffice to say that Alice MacLeod gave great offense to all her friends by her marriage. She did not, however, give them much time for the indulgence of their anger. Having given birth to a daughter within 12 months of her marriage, she died, leaving in abeyance that question as to whether the fault of her marriage should or should not be pardoned by her family. And I read that, I'm like, I had to reread that first chapter, because the way it was worded, I just got a little tumbled around, and I'm like, wait, whether or no she who you are to forgive, if you can, did or did not belong to the upper 10,000. I'm like, wait, what? But the rest of the book is nothing like that. You just get so wrapped up in the characters, and the prose just seemed flawless, and the conversations were so natural and everything, but just that first introduction to Alice and her mother and father and the relationship they had, and her grandfather, the squire, and, but the upper 10,000, I mean, they're, upper class, and I like the way the author is kind of saying, I'm about to describe the situation, and whether or not you can forgive her, I'll explain about her character, but the wording of it was a bit daunting at first. But literally, as I continued with the book, I found it much more easy to read and kind of hard to put down. I was quite ahead of the reading. I started out a little bit late, but I ended up finishing well ahead of the time. And I just really, really thoroughly enjoyed it. I definitely want to continue with the series. I highly recommend it. This will not be my last Trollope book. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Love to see it if Steve did the rest of the series, but he's on to the, I forget what he's doing, the books of Mark, Matthew, or something from the Bible, so I'm not participating in that one currently, but I would love to continue the rest of the series. And let me know if you guys have read it before, what you thought of it, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye-bye.